at first we're kind of relating to our soul like it's a friend or an ally or something that's there. But eventually what happens is we become it. And so it's kind of a reversal. It's almost like my soul is taking care of my body. My soul is taking care of my needs. My soul is giving me the words to speak in a moment in time. And so we become more identified with the soul than anything else we would ever have believed ourselves to be. But there's a true energetic integration, and it ties into ascension, because when we use the word ascension, it's like we're lifting off, like we're going somewhere.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Wetzel. Thank you guys for joining us. I'm with Dr. John Ryan, and Dr. John Ryan is the founder of Unity Field Healing. And I'm so excited to talk more about this. Thank you, Dr. John, for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Lisa. And a big hello to everybody in the listening audience, too.
Yep. So I'm going to just kind of jump into this because I'm so excited to hear what you have to say and explore a little bit more about what Unity Field Healing is. My Southern accent's catching up to me, and all my words are running together. Sorry.
It's lovely. It's always so charming.
So can you kind of tell us a little bit about your history and what your journey was to get you into energy healing, and then basically what brought about Unity Field Healing?
Yeah, sure. So my background, Lisa, is I'm a physician. I studied medicine back in the 1980s. I started in medicine, and as fate would have it, as I was about to finish medical school training, I started to experience some unusual things. So I would go to bed at night, for example, and I would have these out-of-body experiences. My energy would literally pop out of my body and start traveling around the room. I would start seeing energy fields around people at times when I was having conversations with them, and things of that nature. And so I was really unprepared for this. I had spent all my time up to that point in time, studying science and then medicine. And I was just about to graduate from medical school when this started to happen. And I had no frame of reference for it because, in my experience and in my background, my religious background, my, social background, there was no context for understanding these kinds of things. There's a lot of information available today, but back in the late 80s, it was pretty sparse. And so I was not quite sure what was happening. In fact, I thought maybe there was something wrong with me. I thought I might have had like a brain tumor or something unusual like that. But anyway, it began a search for answers. And what happens when we start to have these kind of energetic awakenings and spiritual awakenings, as I'm sure you're aware, Spirit kind of steps in and it starts to guide the process. We begin to have intuitions, and we have an unfolding of different kinds of synchronicities that fall on our pathway to kind of guide us when we don't know where we're going and we don't know the reason why we're living certain things. And so one thing led to another, and I was eventually brought to a bookstore one day that had a lot of new age type books, yoga books, Eastern spirituality books, crystal healing, energy healing, these kinds of things. And I walked into this place and I'm looking around thinking, well, I'm not quite sure how I'll ever find what I need here. There's just so much to look at. And as I was looking around, there was a book on the shelf that literally doubled in size. You know how when you pan your mouse over your computer over an icon and the icon gets bigger? Well, there was a book on the shelf that literally expanded right in front of my eyes. And I went over and I took it off the shelf. And it was entitled The Spontaneous Awakening of Kundalini by Gopi Krishna. And I started to leaf through the book and, discover what some of Gopi Krishna's experiences were, and introducing me to this concept of Kundalini. And I realized it was, in essence, the kind of experience that I was having. And so this opened my mind to a whole field of spirituality that I had no point of contact with or understanding of. And I started to try to learn what I could and try to understand what I could. And so that was the beginning of my search. So one thing, again, led to another. I started to learn about energy healing and yogic processes and the concept of pranayama and the energy bodies and Chinese system of medicine with the meridians and all this kind of stuff. And so as I learned this, I realized there's a whole reality to energy and consciousness and even spirituality that exists behind the scenes that was very new to me at the time. And so that's kind of how I was initiated into all of this information and this material. And so I began to learn about energy healing and consciousness based principles of healing and these types of things and integrate it into my practice. And then I continued working in traditional medicine, and I began learning about, esoteric healing and energy healing. And then I began to apply some of these principles into the healing work. And that kind of unfolded my path for me. It kind of, one thing led into another experience. And eventually I began to have really interesting and profound experiences with people who were healing from various conditions and illnesses and this kind of stuff. And so then experience became the teacher, but it also became the support to help me believe, if you will, in working with unknown forces or energy, these types of things. Mm-hmm. And as my path unfolded, I began having these meditative visions. I started to practice meditation, kind of just a quiet stillness every day to, center my spirit and feel aligned, and kind of not in a traditional way of meditation, but just in my own space of solitude and quietness. And in that, I began to have vision type experiences. I began to see glimpses of past life experiences that I had lived. I began to see energetic things in those spaces. And then all of a sudden, I was delivered a whole series of visions that were really teaching me about something that I refer to today as the 24th chromosome. But it's a whole energy, part of our energetic anatomy, if you will, that ties into many of the changes and things that are happening on the planet right now. And through the course of these visions, I was instructed to begin working with energy in a very specific way. And it was the visions that led to the development of unity field healing. That's kind of how the whole process came into being. So we can explore that a little bit more if you want, but I'll shorten my answer to that for now.
Yeah, well, that's a fabulous answer, and I completely understand the 80s and having to go to bookstores to get information. Yeah, it's definitely changed over the past 30 years, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, as a physician, how, you kind of just briefly touched on kind of incorporating energy work, in the work. What type of physician are you?
I'm a radiologist, so I interpret CT, MRI, ultrasounds, all the diagnostic imaging work that's done. Yeah.
Okay. So how did you find incorporating in the energy work into what you do as a physician?
Well, at the time, when I first finished medical school, for a number of years, I was a family practitioner. So I worked a lot with people at that level of medicine, people seeking, their family medical care. And so a lot of people I found that a lot of people drawn into my practice were people having a lot of psychosomatic conditions, a lot of anxiety and stress related conditions and things. And they had been heavily medicated for one reason or another with anxiolytic medications and all this kind of stuff. And so I spent a lot of my time counseling and then working, with energy processes to help people reconstitute their energy and move through some of the energetic reasons why they were having these conditions and these experiences. And so, but then I continued my study of medicine in diagnostic imaging. And interestingly, diagnostic imaging is the part of medicine that's already begun to work with energy. Everything we do in imaging is based on energy principles. Like, for example, an X-ray or a sound beam or a magnetic field that we use to create sonic or energetic electromagnetic interactions to produce images of what the body looks like. Mm-hmm. And so I often joke with people a little bit to say, medicine has already begun to work with energy because we're doing it in all of this diagnostic work. Yeah. And so as I, continued on my path, I kind of bridged them together. I did a lot of healing work and teaching outside of the diagnostic imaging work with people, and then continued my own path of learning through becoming a specialty trained physician in radiology and then a professor at the university in medicine. And so that's kind of how that unfolded. And you can imagine that created a few little interesting experiences because you're living in two worlds, frankly. Like when you work in the traditional scientific model and then you start becoming aware of energy and spirituality and forces of angelic healing and all these kinds of things, the worlds don't necessarily merge together too well. But people were very receptive to it and very open minded, very understanding for the most part. A lot of other physicians kind of took a hands off approach. They just kind of didn't judge it, but they didn't necessarily express a lot of interest in it either. And so but they were very tolerant. They're very kind and tolerant, and they understood that there are, when you work in medicine, you quickly realize there are so many forces that are involved in healing outside of just the physical world of healing that I think many physicians are open-minded by nature to that. But of course, you're following a scientific model, so you always want to prove everything, and very 3D and factual based. And so the worlds have a little bit of a hard time working together because when you're working with energy and consciousness, you're working with invisible forces. They're things that our current scientific capabilities can't assess very well. Now that's slowly changing. But
Mhm.
at the time, that's up until this point in time, that's been very true.
Yeah.
And so, of course, there were some interesting experiences. But what would happen for the most part is I work in a tertiary level care center. So there's a big oncology center and all this kind of stuff that's part of the institution. And so patients would come to their doctors and they would talk about reading my book or doing exercises that I would recommend for people in healing processes and things. And they would say, "Oh, this physician works at your hospital. You must know him." So there was a lot of those kinds of
Yeah.
experiences, and people were very kind like I said, for the most part
Yeah.
around it. But
Well,
I
well,
think medicine is more open minded than people may realize.
well, that's what I was going to say. I'm a little bit. I'm taken aback. It's like I really had no idea, but I when you're talking about you described it beautifully is that if you're in that healing field and then you see something that you just knew is not going to be cured or the person wasn't going to survive and then they do somewhere I think that kind of has to give you a little bit broader perspective, and
For sure.
understanding.
It's
Yeah.
so easy to rationalize those experiences away. Like as a physician, you can kind of dismiss it and say, "Oh, I guess it's an unusual, spontaneous healing." But the truth is, it's a healing that shouldn't, by virtue of our known facts, really be occurring, and yet it does.
Yeah.
And so you have to. I mean, if you have any curiosity left in you,
Yeah.
you have to at least wonder why things like that might happen. And I think most people, as by human nature, are still a little bit curious. So
Yeah.
it opens our minds for sure.
Well, I'm excited that you were able to share this experience with the scientific world.
Yeah.
And again, because me as an outsider, I put anybody that's in a mind thing, people that do a lot of analytical stuff and have to follow specific procedures and structure. It's for me to hear that they're exposed to our world makes me so excited. So thank you for putting yourself there and
Uh,
being able to share your knowledge and your wisdom with others, and they're receptive to it. That's
thanks.
exciting news. So because also, well, I'm not going to jump this. I'm not going to. I want to jump to question number 10. So I'm going to stick to my plan here. Okay, so thank you for sharing that information. Now I'm going to force myself to ask the question that needs to be asked next instead
All
of
right,
jumping
let's
way
go.
ahead. So, because unity field healing, it's not something that is real commonly known, but it's really significant. It's fascinating what it entails and what it encompasses. So, can you give everybody a little bit of information about what it is and how it works?
for sure. So the whole premise of unity field healing is founded on the understanding that there is a whole quantum organization of consciousness and energy that exists behind all living things. And so our physical body, we recognize the physicality of it. We have fingers and toes and limbs and, hair and what have you. But we also know we are energetic beings, or at least we're growing into a space where most human beings appreciate that. And we start to understand that even the physical world that we see is truly an energetic world. Everything that looks physical is made up of energetic components. And as we start to expand into our understanding of quantum physics, we realize that everything that seems to be physical or in particle form is really just something upon which consciousness has applied itself for it to exist for a transient period of time. Now, those are big words, but that's kind of what quantum understanding is beginning to help us approach as a wisdom. And so when you start having energy experiences yourself, you realize all these teachings about things like chakras and meridians and the various energy bodies that we have, the physical body, the etheric body, the emotional body, the mental body. These are real components of energy. They exist in real terms. Now, they exist in a world that's unseen to us because it's kind of like outside the spectrum of our vision or outside the spectrum of our hearing. They exist at frequencies, if you will, where we don't have the perceptual capacity to see them or hear them. But as our energy evolves and in spaces of consciousness within what we might call our third eye or inner vision, we begin to see these energetic realities as real things. And so as we go through awakenings, we begin to have those kinds of experiences. To someone who hasn't had that, this seems like a very strange world. And you can see why someone might judge it or not understand it or poo-poo it. But when you begin having those experiences, it becomes really hard to dismiss them because you know yourself they're real. And therefore you have to take it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the foundation for what I'm about to say about energy. Behind us as living beings, we also have a spiritual reality. So, in other words, we're not just these energetic beings that pop up on the screen of reality. There's a soul in us. We all have a consciousness that's indwelling. We're not used to, in scientific domains, talking about spiritual things, but yet it's still true. And so, therefore, we have to deal with it. The soul exists within us, and the soul is not limited to this single incarnation. The soul has, as you know very well in your work, the soul has many, many different incarnational experiences, and they're all part of a bigger process or a bigger journey of a soul through consciousness. And so when we start understanding that and begin having experiences of perhaps seeing other lifetimes our soul has lived and so on, then it opens up a whole other realm of both confusion and intrigue. And we have to integrate that somehow into our understanding. As this knowledge and wisdom kind of unfolded itself for me, I was shown these kinds of energy structures that I was explaining earlier. And one of the things I was shown was this big DNA molecule. And so I was in a meditative process, and basically the way I saw this was it looked like a strand of DNA. Now, of course, from my scientific background, I'm very familiar with DNA and all those kinds of things. So when I saw it, I knew immediately it was a helix. But then what I was shown is within this helix is a library of information. It's like our own Akashic record, if you will. It's almost like we go into the 24th chromosome to read energy that's very specifically related to our own soul's process and the reason we're here in body and in form. And so in this space, we can begin to have access to energy and information that exists outside the spectrum of our physical life. We may have memories of another lifetime. We may have an awareness of why something from another lifetime is actually creating an issue or a problem in this lifetime. We become aware of the quantum influence, if you will, of some of these energetic structures. Now, coupled with this, I was also very intrigued since I was young about the concept of something that is termed ascension. And I knew, Lisa, as a little boy, I'm sure you did too, as a young girl, when we were born on the planet, we knew that the world had the opportunity to go through a change, a very rapid acceleration of consciousness and energy that is happening now on the planet. It's actually begun, and it's termed the ascension for people who are familiar with the concept. And so, what I was shown in these visions is that as humanity is triggered, if you will, to go into this new time space, this new ascension process, the energy and information in this 24th chromosome is going to begin to open up. Now, the way we would experience that as human beings is we would become aware of some of the things that are in there, the memories that are in there. And I'll often joke to people if I'm in a seminar, I'll say, imagine it's 1952. And I ask everybody in the room, who here has lived a prior life? How many people are aware of another incarnation? You know, a big hook would have come and dragged me off to the psychiatric ward, and like people would have thought I had lost my mind. But if you were in a room full of awakening people today, like sometimes I'm in giving presentations, and 75 or 85% of the people in the room are consciously aware and have had visions even of other incarnational experiences that they lived. And it's really just a testament. It's kind of like a living proof that something's changing. It was not that way, 3 decades and 4 decades ago. And so all of this is happening as part of this evolution. Now, what I was shown is that within our own quantum structure, we each have access to healing power. And the healing power exists through the axis of this chromosome. And so as we learn about its existence, as we learn to work consciously with the energy it contains, we can bring healing and personal transformation into our lives, coupled with the ascension that's taking place, to bring a lot of healing by grace, if you will, just bring healing into our physical, mental, emotional reality, and to begin to transform our lives in ways that are very profound. Now, there's a caveat that goes along with this, because as the 24th chromosome first begins to open, it creates a lot of confusion for people. People all of a sudden might go through an experience where they feel disgruntled, or like everything that their life is meaningless all of a sudden, or they're doing a job and they have absolutely zero interest in it anymore, and they feel this big compulsion within themselves to go through the experience, but to begin to create a new or different reality than the one that they knew before. And that can be really unsettling for people, because, like we like our stability, we all do. And so, as you feel unfamiliar to yourself, or you feel like your work isn't satisfying anymore, or sometimes it's relationships or friendships and these kinds of things. And it all begins to go through a transformation while you renew yourself, or you refine yourself, or you become familiar with what's true to you at this new point in time. Mm-hmm. And so that can be a little unsettling. And then the other thing is people start to become quite sensitive to energy and aware of energetic things. And they become much more sensitive to the food they're eating, to the environment they're living in, to the friendships they have, to the way they spend their time, to the type of exercise they do, to you name it. Everything is impacted all over the spectrum of our lives. And we have to become aware of it so that we know how to support ourselves through the process of the change and the transformation. The transformation itself is it's a blessing. There's nothing about it that's really bad or you wouldn't want, but you have to be aware of what the process might entail. Now, the way we term that in our modern parlance is healing processes. We're all healing all the time.
Yep.
But healing is really a process of refinement and transformation and removing things that are creating energetic blockages and restrictions and even distortions in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And that's how I see it. Right. Exactly. Ditto on everything that you just said. So when you're talking about that, when going back to the 24th chromosome opening up and everything that you said, and I mean, my guides have told me, described it exactly as you're describing it. Other people have said exactly the same things. And we're witnessing, again, people that are exactly what you said, not happy with their job all of a sudden, maybe not happy with the people in their lives, all of these different things, that everything that you just said. But how do we recognize that that 24th chromosome is actually, I mean, is there like a physical change that we can tell that it's actually beginning to open up? And then how do we tell when it's actually completed?
Well, it's interesting because if we go back through science, excuse me one second. If we go back into science and we look at the human genetic structure, humans have 23 pairs of physical chromosomes. So if we look at the nucleus of a cell, there's 23 pairs of chromosomes. Half come from our maternal contribution and half from the paternal contribution, and they'll make 23 pairs of chromosomes. Every other mammal on the planet has 24 pairs of chromosomes. And when we start looking more carefully at the human genome, chromosome number 2 is actually a blended chromosome. We can tell by the fact that the way the telomeres are positioned in the chromosome, that it used to be 2 chromosomes that for some reason or another, mysteriously, merged into one structure. And they timestamp it to about somewhere between 50 and 200,000 years ago that happened for humanity. The 24th chromosome is not a physical structure. It's a quantum structure. It's something that exists in a dimension of energy outside the physical realm. It's more like an overlighting force, if you will. Like it's an energy that's overlighting us while we're in our bodies, but it doesn't show up in a physical way. Okay. Now, as the chromosome undergoes an expansion or an activation, or however we want to term that process of the energy of it opening to us, it has influence on us in all kinds of different ways, but they're very hard to measure physically. We don't see changes in the genes, for example, in our cells. We don't see genetic transformations. But what can happen is the expression of the genetics within the chromosomes can be altered. So if you were to only look at our chromosomes like microscopically or by looking at an electron microscope, everything is going to be the same. But what gets expressed is different. And so we're in a field like the work of Bruce Lipton, for example, with epigenetics. What we've begun to understand is the genes that get expressed within our genetic composition have all kinds of influences, social, cultural. You know, if we're raised in a terrible environment, if there's a lot of toxicity, if there's a lot of angry and difficult emotions, all of these things can have an implication on which genes get expressed, or if we become ill in different ways. And so we're beginning to understand that there's a lot more to DNA than we realize. And so the way the DNA expresses itself, the degree to which it's relaxed and open for gene expression, has the influence of all these things that fall in the spectrum of epigenetic assessment. And the 24th chromosome fits better there. It's kind of like an energy influence that would strengthen or calibrate the gene expression in the body to then be healthy, to be balanced, to be open to expressing itself in its fullest potential, and the, not expressing disease aspects of the genetics, for example. And so it's hard to measure it. I don't know if we're ever going to be able to measure it until we have quantum instruments. Mm-hmm. I think when that happens, we'll be able to look at these things in that way. Mm-hmm. But until we're there, it's going to be hard to measure them in a physical way.
Yeah.
But that aside, people have no confusion about the experience because so many things change in their life. And so they begin to become aware of this inner process of transformation that's pushing on them. They're interested in things they weren't before. They want to learn about energy healing. They want to take a class in reading the Akashic records. They want to, do all these kinds of things. There's something in them pushing them or inspiring them towards doing this. And so at the same time, there may be challenges, like we discussed earlier. You go through these changes of interests and relationships and all that kind of stuff. On the other side, there's this tremendous force of inspiration and guidance that wakes up at the same time. And we become aware of these changes because we're feeling them inside of ourselves. And we think, okay, well, 20 years ago, I wouldn't have done that, but here I am, it's kind of, interested in it, and off I go. Yeah. And so we can look at that as a very natural process, like I'm just changing as I grow and developing new interests. But when you look at the caliber of the interest or the type of the interest, you start to realize pretty quickly they all have either a spiritual component or a healing component, or people want to learn about Reiki, or they want to learn about energy healing, or they have a room full of crystals now. And their husband, their partner is shaking their head. These crystals in the house and all this kind of stuff. And it's a very natural process, but you realize the quality of the vibration, or the type of the energetic transformation is really at that level. And so when you see yourself in that space, you're living something kind of peculiar and different. And that's really what happens. So it's easy to identify.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think it's important for us because with just like the average practitioner, person, not practitioner, but the average person, this does get to become a challenge because they find that maybe they don't fit in anymore.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing is that, as we're growing and starting to shift and changing, and people are finding that this old world's not fitting me anymore. I'm not happy anymore. I'm feeling discontent. But if I go over here, my happy place, and where it feels better, it's unknown. And I lose my security.
Right.
And even though I may be unhappy or miserable in this way that I'm conditioned to live and to be in, it's familiar to me. So what I found is that people are hesitant and moving in this direction. I'm calling it direction of freedom because to me it's free. It's moving, literally you're letting everything go and you're living in this way of living in freedom. So have you found that, the people that are starting to really step in and have these experiences, they're afraid to dive in fully and completely, that they kind of find themselves going back to what they're familiar with and comfortable in?
Yeah, I think there's like an ebb and a flow. Some people have like a powerful experience, and it may be triggered by something in life. It may be they have an accident or an illness, or they're fired from a job, or their marriage breaks down, or these kinds of like big triggering events that we can all live in our lives. And so something will happen that will kind of reorient their reality, and that's the catalyst for the beginning of some of these changes. So when that happens, it kind of takes care of itself in one way, because the change happens first and then the transformation seems to follow.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at other times, you're very comfortable in your reality and it's very familiar and very known, and you're worried about destroying it or dismantling it.
Mhm.
And I always say to people, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to. You just have to find a new authentic equilibrium within it. And everything that isn't meant to be part of it will then naturally want to transform. And if it doesn't, it won't be hard to let it go, because you'll be in a place where you recognize it's no longer appropriate for you. And so you just have to give yourself the permission, the freedom, the support to at least follow your dreams, follow your intuition, follow what gives you a sense of passion, follow what really inspires you. And in doing that, the rest will unfold around it. But if you become very afraid of the outcome or uncertain about the outcome, it will shut down the process, because your soul's not necessarily going to want to push you beyond your comfort zone. It will. It's very capable of doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But it will often kind of let us figure our way,
Yeah.
kind of slow down the process if we need to. But the power of the transformation that's taking place is so strong now, it's really hard for us to resist. And I always say to people, our souls are so much more courageous than we can ever imagine ourselves as human beings. Like when you think about some of the things that souls take on in their lifetimes and their incarnations, and you're planning, you're in a spirit planning session, you're planning your next lifetime, and you're putting all of that content. You think, I have to be crazy to do that. But the soul is not afraid the same way as we are with our emotions and our beliefs and our fears and our need for security. So the soul will push us comfortably, and as long as we keep invoking it and saying, okay, I'm a little bit afraid, but let's figure this out. Let's figure out how we're going to do it, and show me a way that's smooth and as graceful as possible and as kind as possible and healing as possible. and just help me take my next steps and show me the way.
Mhm.
What is really powerful about it is we begin to awaken this sense of intuition that unfolds synchronicity. And so you learn pretty quickly, if you're open at all, that when you trust your intuition, it leads you to remarkable experiences. It's things you couldn't have discovered because you didn't know they existed.
Mhm.
And just by trusting your intuition and following that sense, that compass, that guidance that comes inside, then we're brought to things that then unfold all kinds of other awarenesses or knowledge or potential experiences that we didn't even know were out there. And but it can only happen if we trust that intuitive spark and we really
Yeah.
kind of let ourselves go.
Yeah.
There's nothing to be afraid of in the end, really. It's all about getting ourselves into our correct soul alignment. And when you realize the magic of that and the beauty of that, the fear is just part of human nature, but you learn to burst through it, I guess, or burn it down, I guess, however you want to say it.
Yeah. Well, I am so happy to hear you say everything that you just said. Because I can't tell you how many times when I'm doing sessions with people, this is what we talk about.
Yeah,
And that so many people understand exactly, how exactly what you've just said and where you are. I can't tell you how many people I've had that are just right there on that line. I call it 5D, 3D, 5D,
yeah,
3D, 5D,
yeah,
3D, and they just keep jumping
yeah,
back and forth because they're not sure what's going to happen. And I
yeah.
mean, I've experienced it. I understand. I've gone through all of this changing and recognizing every single day something lets go. My mother issues, all of a sudden they come up and it's time to let them go, and going through all of this stuff that we're doing in order to get to where we're going. And
It's something that's important, Lisa, I think, for people to understand when they're in that space is we like to know the outcome,
yeah,
but
yep,
that's not the way energy flows in this
right,
new space.
yeah,
You can only know your next step.
yeah,
And so I'll often tell people a story. I remember once I was in the woods walking on a trail and I kind of got lost and it was getting towards the end of the day. And I thought, oh, I don't know really where I'm supposed to go here. And I walked down the trail and I came to a literal fork in the road. And I'm looking at this thinking, oh, like this one might bring me into the woods. This one might bring me back to the parking lot. I'm not sure where to go. And all of a sudden, this bird flew out of the sky right in front of me on a branch on the tree, and it went down one of the pathways. And I thought, I think I'm supposed to follow the bird.
yep,
And I did. And within 20 minutes, I was back to the parking lot.
yeah,
And if I had gone the other path, I don't know where I would have ended up.
yeah,
But the point of this is you'll know what you need to know the minute you get there.
yeah,
And you don't necessarily know the end of the path, and you don't really ever get to know the end of the path because it's an evolution. We continue to grow and change. And so, but you'll always know what you need to know at that moment in time.
yeah,
And we have to get really comfortable with trusting that and resting in that space and allowing ourselves to trust that kind of guidance within
yeah.
ourselves.
Well, it's funny that you should use the bird as an example because my guides use the bird all the time. Using the animal spirit guides and all of our connections that take us down our path, literally down the path,
Yep.
and take you home and show you the way. But what you hit on is letting go and letting go of control, letting go of wanting to have a certain outcome.
Yeah.
Having this idea of it has to go the way that my mind has created it to be. And so the
Yeah.
way I call it, I say we're going on an adventure.
Yeah.
Okay, so what if you wake up in the morning and you can literally say, I'm just going to let the day unfold and live the adventure of the day instead of trying to control every aspect of it. And that's
Yeah.
hard for people to do. It's even
Yeah.
hard for me to do sometimes. So, but absolutely, I get it. But there's one other thing that you keep talking about, and I think it's really important is the soul relationship.
Mhm.
And you're talking about, we know we have a soul inside of us. Everyone has a soul. We watch near death experiences so that we can watch the journey of the soul and hear the stories, and we know that the soul is within us. But the humans, as my guides call us, the humans are disconnected from the soul. It's like we are so stuck in our heads that we forget that there is this energetic body that's within each and every one of us. So do you have any great tools or suggestions where people can become more one with their soul and develop a relationship with their soul?
Absolutely. So, one of the things about healing in general, when we do healing work or unity field healing work or any kind of meditative work, what we're literally doing is we're bringing the energy of our soul into our body. It's closer to the body. And so we become aware of that force of light and consciousness, and we're practicing integration, is really what we're doing when we do those things. And so I'll often say to people, if your soul didn't want to be here today, you'd be done. You would drop your body and you'd go off into the ethers and you'd do something in the land of spirit. So the fact that you're still here in your body means your soul has you here on purpose and by design. There's a reason for your life. There's a reason why your soul is choosing to be here at this moment in time. And so I'll often kind of use that kind of language to help people realize that everything about their life is important, and it's by a spiritual purpose. There's actually a purpose to it. Now, whether we understand that purpose or we try to frame it in, our typical contextual terms, that's where we run into trouble sometimes. Because we begin identifying with ourselves as our thoughts, our beliefs, our physical body, the permanence of the physical body when it's really an impermanent vessel. It's going to come and go. And we realize our soul lives beyond it. We become afraid of people that we love, losing people we love, losing connection with people we love, all those kinds of things. And fear becomes a really dominant force for many, many people. And it's that fear that creates the separation. So the reversal of fear, of course, is love. So there's a lot of beautiful spiritual teachings that talk about love and fear as the two primal forces in reality. To move back into our soul is to move it back into a space of luminosity and trust and understanding that there's a support system that's there, that's for us, it's part of us, it's within us, and it couldn't be any closer to us. And that when we start to open ourselves to that spiritual side of things, we learn how to communicate with it. We learn how to have experiences of trusting it and so on and so forth. When you start to do that, the soul integration, the way that I term it, is really natural because you realize you wouldn't want it any other way. Like, why worry about everything when you can learn to have that kind of that kind of communication inside of yourself and dismiss the fears and the doubts and the anxieties and all the things that keep us in these anxious states and learn how to live in that space of presence. And when we're in that space, understanding there's a light to it. And the more present we are, the more we get to give, to contribute, the stronger our experience of reality through that light we hold within us. And everything that we get to touch is influenced by that force. And so you realize pretty quickly you wouldn't want it any other way. Mm-hmm. So we have to make the soul attractive. And I think the reason why we tend not to do that is because there's been a lot of religious influence in our spiritual thinking. And so we think of spirit as something we don't deserve, or, I'm not worthy, or I'm this or that or the other thing. And so we see it as something we either don't deserve or we can't get access to, or it's not a personal relationship. And we have to get past all those blockages of beliefs to realize every single human being, no matter how wonderfully or how horribly they're showing up on the planet in terms of what they're creating, is still fueled by a soul. And the soul is having experiences of its own nature for its own purpose. And that we can learn to connect with that because there's so much healing and beauty and creativity that comes to us when we make that connection and integrate it. I talk about it as an integration because it helps us understand that there's a little bit of work to do or process involved in bringing our soul more into the form world, if you will.
Yeah.
And so, but all the healing work is leading us there. That's in the end what it's always doing. It's always bringing that energy more present in the body.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I'm just going to kind of share a little bit of what my idea of ascension is.
Mhm.
And because what you're describing is what I've experienced and the way that I see it. So obviously doing this, the work that I do, I've been doing it for a long time. So 1996 is really when I started on this learning process. And what I've discovered is that we kind of have a tendency, I used to see our soul as in a ball. It's like this little ball of light that sits here. And then
Mhm.
when we have trauma, heartache, we put a patch over it. When we're disappointed, we put a patch over it. When we have certain belief systems that limit, we put all these little patches over us. And
Mhm.
it constricts the soul. It
Yeah.
keeps it in its little ball. I always see it like a cannonball, like a little iron
Yes.
ball that's stuck in there. But it's separate from our physical being. The whole, like, it's when I see it that way, I see that it's like it's separate from all of the cells, separate from the muscle tissue, separate from going down my arms. It's holding it so constricted that it can't
Mhm.
expand through the body. But when we
Mhm.
start doing our work and letting go of these old belief systems and healing the trauma, then all these patches start removing. And then,
Yeah.
and I also believe that you need to make friends with your soul. And it's like every
Mhm.
morning, it's like, good morning, soul. How are you today? Hi, my friend. just to keep us conscious that there is this energetic body within us. But as we start becoming more familiar and developing this relationship with the soul, what I've experienced is that I can start feeling this energy body grow,
Mhm.
and it almost turns into particles, and I can feel these particles start intertwining with my cells and my muscles and my skeletal structure,
Yeah.
and it helps it to expand where we can be literally integrated. And to me, that's the integration process that I've
Yes.
experienced. Does that make
Yeah, it's very
sense?
beautifully expressed, Lisa. It's exactly the way I see things or believe in things myself from the experiences I've had. And in fact, what begins to happen is at first we're kind of relating to our soul like it's a friend or an ally or something that's there. But eventually what happens is we become it. And so it's a kind of a reversal. It's almost like my soul is taking care of my body. My soul is taking care of my needs. My soul is giving me the words to speak in a moment in time. And
Mhm.
so we become more identified with the soul than anything else we would ever have believed ourselves to be. But there's a true energetic integration. And it
Mhm.
ties into ascension because when we use the word ascension, it's like we're lifting off, like we're going somewhere,
Mhm.
the angels are going to come or the aliens are going to come and lift, pop us out of here and save us.
Yeah.
It's like we're going to go to a higher plateau. But really, what's happening in ascension is an integration of higher energy. It's like higher octaves of energy or higher domains of energy are blending into the physical world and they're blending into our physical bodies. So it's like we're incarnating more of our soul's energy in the physical form. That's exactly
Yeah.
what's happening through the
Yeah.
ascension. So it's kind of a descension if you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The soul's coming down, not so
Yeah.
much the going up.
Yeah, yeah, and
Just
again, it's deep programming, all of these layers that we've put on us just to basically just to expose
yeah,
what we've been hiding. We're
correct.
getting down to the truth of who we really are,
That's right.
and that's to me, that's what ascension is.
Yeah, and it's
That's
magic, isn't
it is.
it?
It really is. It's exciting. It's exciting because, like you said, it's a magical experience when you're feeling lost and confused and you're walking down this road, and then all of a sudden a raven flies in front of you or something and
Mhm.
leads you back to your car, and you recognize, yeah, they're watching over me. I'm recognizing the connection now, and they never leave, and they're always here. All of our guides and everything are always
Yeah.
here to help us to be more connected to all of the possibilities and who we really truly are, the truth of who we are.
And you blend into this world of that continuous support and guidance, like it becomes an extended part of you. It's
Yeah.
you realize you're not limited just to your own reality, your own personhood, or your own identity, but you're part of this living field, this whole cosmos of energy and
Mhm.
consciousness that's working with every one of us in that way as we learn to do that. So
Yeah.
you really blend into the oneness of
Yeah.
reality. And
Yeah.
that's the magic of that evolution. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really do believe that that's my definition of
Yeah.
ascension.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Yeah.
Um,
100%.
So you threw in a little statement that people may not have caught, but you mentioned something about the galactics. You just said it one time, but I heard it. So there is a connection with you and the Syrians.
Yeah. So in in my own evolution, as I had undergone, some of these visionary teachings, the teachings that led to the development of the unity field healing work, and so on, it all kind of unfolded in a really beautiful way and synchronous way. And I was minding my own business as usual. And one day I was in a meditation, and this group of light beings presented themselves to me in my third eye vision. And they came as this big ball of light. It was like this, almost like a sun, a beautiful sun, but the light in it was very blue and white. And as the vision of that came into my third eye, the light expanded into an array, and out of it, like walking out of a cloud of smoke, kind of a sensation, all of these light beings just kind of presented themselves. And they were all made of energy. They had a human form, but they were really made of energy. Like they had a head, but I couldn't really see facial features, etc. But they had arms made of energy. And they presented themselves to me that way because they were when you have these kinds of visions, the magic of them is every single aspect of the vision is meaningful. Like there's something to be discerned from the way the vision appears, the way it goes away, the content in it, the position of things in it. Everything has this magical, incredible, smorgasbord of information, and it's all contained in these visual aspects. Mm-hmm. So when the light beings presented to me in my vision this way, what they were saying is, we are a unified force of consciousness. We can take on an individuated expression as individual beings, but we're working as one. Mm-hmm. And so we were here, and the term they gave themselves was the Syrian Blue-White Collective. And they explained to me that they're very present with the earth. They're very present with the ascension process and all the kinds of healings that are taking place on the earth in different ways. They have a really profound connection to the crystalline grid and the electromagnetic grid and all the grid forces on the planet. And that they've been here and part of humanity's evolution. The way they said it was since before the beginning of time. Yeah. And so they came to me and they said they've been working behind the scenes with Unity Field Healing, but they presented themselves to me in this conscious way because they wanted me to start a series of monthly transmissions. And the transmissions, they said, were for people who are undergoing a profound awakening, what we might call the old souls or the light workers on the planet, and that they want to be available to support people in a really tailored, individual way to support them in their own ascension journey. Mm-hmm. And so they began this series of transmissions each month where they provide teachings around different topics. And then we do a meditative transmission, it's called, where we go into meditation together. I'm shown a series of visual images which guide the meditation. And then people are receiving the energetic transference, if you will, or the transmission that's being given. And they're there to work with us at these times. They kind of come into our space, into our energy, into the collective meditative process, and they work with people in the meditations in a very personal and tailored kind of a way. Mm-hmm. And so they said the reason for that is there are people kind of at the forefront, I guess, of the evolutionary shift and change, and that they want to make sure people have access to the kinds of things that can be gifted to us and given to us because of the work that's being done at that level of being. So that's how they came to me now. So since that's almost 5 years ago now that the transmissions began, and they're still occurring. Every month there's a Syrian transmission with that background understanding. Yeah.
So how do they? I'm trying to word it. I have 3 questions and trying to figure out how to put it, say it correctly. Okay, so these specific beings they assisted you in creating the unified field of healing?
They said they're overlighting it from behind the scenes. But it's funny because at that level of consciousness, it's never about, the way they explained it is they they work behind the scenes supporting the process. The process itself is such a natural process that kind of belongs to wisdom. It's like nobody really owns it, or, they're not doing it. They're participating in a wisdom to support us. And that's the nature of the work of unity field healing as well.
Mhm.
It's interesting because for me, Lisa, I had other experiences where I had seen beings that I would identify from other places. Like, for example, I had a vision once of my own Pleiadian mother. And so I thought, oh, well, if there's any star connections and these kinds of things, I guess that I'm connected to the Pleiades. So I was very surprised when the Syrians came in this vision and introduced themselves. But I realized, with my own evolution of my story, that there are many forces of light in different constellations. There's the Syrians, the Pleiadians, the Arcturians, the Lyrans, the Orions, all kinds of beings in different places. And at that level of consciousness, they work together in a very different space of consciousness than we're used to in the 3D world. So there's a lot less separation. There's characteristics and qualities of all these different kinds of beings, but they work together for a common cause, if you will. They're all aware of their own divinity. They're all aware of their own light, and they really work in that collective space of consciousness in that frame of mind. And so when they come to work with us, there are all kinds of different galactic beings, if you will, that do come and participate in different ways. And our own soul has certainly had experiences in some of these other civilizations. Like, you might have a memory of a lifetime on another planet, or it as a different kind of a being, as a Syrian or as a Pleiadian. And so the soul is really interesting in that way. We're always trying to understand it in a 3D context. And it can't really, I don't think, be understood. I mean, we can approach it. We can have a certain kind of understanding around it. But I think we have to be in the space of that reality to fully grasp and understand what all that means.
Yeah.
And so there's a connection not just with the Syrians, but with many other light beings as well. But they came to work with this work and with the transmission specifically.
Yeah. And so what do you think the ultimate goal is with all of your helpers?
I think the goal is to help humanity awaken and integrate these higher dimensions of light. So they want to help us do that because they're aware that the destiny of the earth is to move into what we would call an ascended civilization, a divine conscious civilization, a civilization that's aware of itself as a facet of the creator and the creator light. And so the earth is destined to move into that. And the next phase of humanity's evolution is to move a little bit like out of the duality experience and into the unity experience. That's the simple terms I use. And so we're moving into a space of unity consciousness, and we're beginning to understand our oneness, our collective nature, and the ability of us to work as a collective force of consciousness for good. And so as we integrate our own ascension or integrate these aspects of light and energy within ourselves, we're learning to do that. And so they're here to help us. They can't do it for us. They can't do it to us. They can only support us as we make our own intent for that evolution.
Mm-hmm.
However, the nature of energy, that is the earth, and the nature of consciousness, that is humanity, is evolving so quickly that everything in the universe is moving us in this direction very, very quickly. So we need support and help from beings that understand these kinds of things to make the transition more graceful, more fluid, more easy, and more fulfilling. And so that's really why they're there in my mind. They're to help us see more.
Well, I see them the same way. Everything that you said, this is exactly how I see it and perceive it as well. But I have, a lot of people ask me questions about, well, how do you explain all of the chaos, all of the hatred, all of the division? So when you're asked that question, how do you respond to that?
When the best way is through analogy. When we look at great spiritual avatars, they always taught humanity through analogy, whether it's Buddha or Jesus or any of the great prophets or beings. They always spoke in terms to frame understanding through the way of allegory and metaphor, storytelling.
Yeah.
And so the easiest way for us to understand that is by telling a story. And if you had a room that had been in a house and it had been all sealed up and the windows were boarded up and, the fabric, all the furniture was covered in fabric and nobody had been in there for like 1,000 years. And someone opens the door and you go into the space, it's full of cobwebs, it's full of dust, there's no light. As you beat the boards down, as you start to begin the transformation of the space by letting light in and fresh air in and all that kind of stuff, the first part of that process is really messy. There's a lot of dust, there's a lot of dirt, there's a lot of debris that has to be lifted and shaken off and what have you, in order to expose the space to build something brand new and to do a beautiful refurbishing or renovation or to make it a beautiful space.
Mhm.
And it's the greatest analogy, I think, for what's happening on the earth. There are things that are part of human consciousness that can't be brought forward into the new. And in order for us to kind of resolve them and integrate them, we have to shake up the dust. And the way we live that in real human and psychological terms is there's an exposure. There's an exposure of all kinds of things that we need to see about the way we're living, about the way we're being, about the way humanity is conducting itself, and it has to be corrected. And sometimes the only way to correct it is to really see it full force. And so I think what we're living through right now is part of that process. That's the way I understand it. It's not fun. It's not pretty at times. It's not easy. It can be really soul crushing at different times. But we have to understand the bigger purpose and potential and understand that 5 years from now or 10 years from now, when we look back at this, we'll really understand what it was about. But while we're in the maelstrom of it, we really learn how, the most important thing is we learn how to hold our balance and the perspective of what's happening so we don't get lost in the confusion and distortion and whirling energies of everything that's happening.
Very well said. Yes, exactly. So we're actually running out of time. So I want you to share your final words of wisdom with us. What would be the last thing that you'd like to share with people before we
I
check?
think the most important thing I would share today, Lisa, is the world is in transformation and transition. It's so difficult in so many ways. It's like I said, it can be soul crushing. It can be, dismantling to the psyche in so many different ways. And so it's important that people learn how to reclaim their power, to move back into a space of claiming their own authenticity and learning how to work in balance and to bring their own emotional, mental body and their energy bodies back into balance and to create a sense of peace and awareness that they can hold in their own space and radiate it in the world and really hold that energy and vibration on the planet in their own small or large sphere of influence, whether it's as small as your own apartment to your role in your family, to your role in your community, or on a planetary scale as a politician or a teacher or whatever it is you're doing, to really hold that balance within you and to be able to really illuminate your space like that. If we think of the way the Syrians were, the collective, the more of us that are doing that, the more of us who hold that space and work together to help each other hold that space, you can see we're building a force field, an energy. And that's the energy that we're bringing into the planet to make this 3D, 5D transition. That's how we do. When we start understanding that, we realize, oh, that's actually our purpose, even more than anything we would identify it to be, like to write a book or to do this job or that job or whatever. Our greatest purpose right now on the planet is to hold that energetic posture. And so that's my final words of wisdom to people. And I encourage everybody to pursue whatever they need to pursue in order to be able to do that with their whole heart.
Yeah, well, very well said again. And that's a good way to end this conversation. But before we do the final ending, how do people get a hold of you and find out more about the programs that you offer?
Of course, yeah. So everything that I do in terms of teaching and work is on a single website. It's unityfieldhealing altogether.com. And so there's information on there about Unity Field healing, the sessions, becoming a practitioner of the work. There are about 500 practitioners now around the planet who are doing this work. We're about to launch a teacher training program so that practitioners can become teachers of the work. It's all on there. And then all the Syrian work is also there as well, the transmissions and those kinds of things. If you just use the top toolbar, you'll kind of see the various sections on the website and navigate easily through the whole process.
Good. Well, Dr. John Ryan, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for the experiences that you've had, the wisdom that you have, and being able to share the knowledge. So thank you so much for being here. And for everybody that's watching, thank you for hanging out with us today. And I hope to see you again next time.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It was a really, truly a pleasure. A joy to speak to you, and a big heart hug to everybody out there in the audience, too.
Yeah, good.